But what about Hatha Yoga? Most Westerners imagine that Hatha Yoga, often called physical yoga, has nothing to do with Hinduism or spirituality. Isn't at least this form of yoga purely physical? If that is the case, one is compelled to ask why, for example, in Chicago, the Center for Hatha Yoga Instruction is located in the Temple of Kriya Yoga, which for decades has been a leader in providing high-quality, in-depth training for those who aspire to teach yoga. Instructors are trained under the direction of Sri Goswami Kriyananda Ji, who carries the flame of the lineage of Sri Babaji, brought to this country by Paramahansa Yogananda. The fact that the West was ready to adopt yogic spirituality under the guise of health enhancement was thoroughly demonstrated by Paramahansa Yogananda. This pioneer Hindu missionary founded the Self-Realization Society with headquarters in Southern California. Not counting the multitudes initiated by his followers, Yogananda personally initiated some 100,000 into the practice of Kriya Yoga, also known as Hatha Yoga, for the express purpose of, quote, self-realization, end quote. Today there are millions of Americans who practice Hatha Yoga under the illusion that it is purely physical and has nothing to do with spirituality or religion. This is a popular and deeply entrenched delusion deliberately promoted among unsuspecting Westerners. If Hatha Yoga is purely physical, why has it been handed down from spiritual masters known as yogis? Why is authentic Hatha Yoga always associated with spiritual meditation aimed at self-realization? In other words, to realize one's oneness with God, as Hinduism teaches. If there are centers in the West that claim to offer a purely physical Hatha Yoga for health benefits alone, why do they teach the very same breathing exercises and positions that Paramahansa Yogananda brought to the West from India, as taught to him by his spiritual guru, Sri Babaji? These techniques were all precisely developed over centuries to induce subtle changes in states of consciousness, leading to, quote, self-realization, end quote. They were not developed primarily for physical benefits. If they are honest, the instructors of Hatha Yoga themselves, even in the West, admit that it is not purely physical. Richard Hittleman, one of the early pioneers of this so-called, quote, physical, end quote, yoga in America, states that, quote, as yoga students practiced the physical positions, they would eventually be ready to investigate the spiritual component, which is the entire essence of the subject, end quote. Such is the consensus of the experts. Concerning Hatha Yoga, well-known teacher of yoga Swami Sivananda Radha declares, quote, asanas, physical postures and exercises, are a devotional practice. Each asana creates a certain state of mind to bring the seeker into closer contact with the higher self, end quote. And by higher self, of course, they mean whatever you want to accept as the God within and without. Yoga was introduced by Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita as the sure way to Hindu heaven, and Shiva, one of the most feared Hindu deities, known as the Destroyer, is addressed as Yogeshwara, Lord of Yoga. One of the most authoritative Hatha Yoga texts, the 15th century Svatmarama's Hatha Yoga Pradipika, lists Lord Shiva as the first Hatha Yoga teacher. The average yoga instructor never mentions and may not even know the many warnings in ancient texts that, quote, Hatha Yoga is a dangerous tool. One can be possessed by a Hindu deity, in other words, a demon, through the altered state of consciousness induced by this practice, end quote. If what Western yoga teachers offer merely involves physical stretching and breathing exercises, as they claim, why don't they promote it only as such? Why do they persist in calling it yoga while denying any connection to what yoga really is? Why this cover-up? We ignore at our peril the truth about yoga confessed by those who know it best, a truth that we intend to pursue in the following pages.